G'day, welcome back. We've got a lot to get through today. We've got Senator Alex Antic, taking a little stab at his own version of Doge here in Australia. Katie Gallagher getting roasted. 7 News displaying the fact that they are useless as media. And of course, the Farah by-election, which has been called for the 9th of May. And finally, we'll get some information on the conflict in Iran. But before we get into all of that, if you like the show, please like it down below as well. Please leave a comment if you have a thought or a question. While we're still small, I can reply to pretty much every comment. So if you do have a thought or a question, leave it down in the comments. You can save the episode. The more you click on the screen, the more you help this show out. But we're going to get into all of those stories and more on the Mark Pirotta Show.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. Blaster! Welcome to the Mark Pirotta Show.
Before we get into the main topics for today, we have to look at the biggest breakup in Australian history. Kyle and Jackie O have been the people to listen to on standard radio for the better part of 20 years. Kyle and Jackie O have been the purveyors of moral degeneracy for the better part of 20 years. They are the two biggest voices effectively in Australian media. If you are any form of celebrity, you go on Kyle and Jackie O. If you are anyone with any sort of name that wants to get themselves out on public radio, you go on Kyle and Jackie O. Only recently, they signed something like $200 million worth of a contract, which saw them for the next 10 years underneath a branch, which effectively gave them each $10 million a year. Now, this by no means indicates the fact that they were in any way, shape, or form good for Australia. If anything, most of what they did is degenerate, morally corrupt, and downright nonsense content. It was very difficult to ever listen, at least as a Catholic, to Kyle and Jackie O in any real sense. You never knew what they were going to say. You always assumed that it would be something that your children could not listen to. And so 106.5 has been something that is not listened to, at least in our family, and probably for the majority of the conservative movement for a very, very long time. But with their breakup, it's starting to reveal how bad the program was from the inside, not just from the outside. Now, as someone who does not do live content yet, but does recorded content, I understand that it's difficult sometimes to self-moderate when you are speaking, even when you're speaking in a situation like this, where I get to cut up my content. And if I say something that I probably didn't mean, but it just comes out because you're saying something and the words just flow out of your mouth, especially when you don't have a script in front of you, it's very easy to say the wrong thing. And so to an extent, you can say, okay, yes, you know what, Kyle and Jackie O, it's okay. Sometimes you get things wrong. You're speaking live into a microphone. It's difficult. But this is a continuous repetition of the same nonsense that has been spoken continuously for, again, the better part of 20 years. And now they are breaking up. Not for the first time, but seemingly for the last time. They are both getting lawyers. They are both arming up against each other, with Jackie O effectively claiming that Kyle created a hostile work environment and Kyle rearing up for the defense. Well, let's take a listen to what was said between the pair that sparked this. I'm sure it wasn't the only reason that they are breaking up, but this was the on-air live fight that happened between Kyle and Jackie O. Watch.
Jackie has given notice that she can no longer continue to work on the show with Kyle on breakfast. Kyle has been given 14 days to remedy a serious breach of contract in respect of the show.
Tell me where I've been off with the fairies during the show.
I don't have to prove anything.
No, you do. You can't accuse me of doing something and then say I don't have to
Listen to the program. You'll hear yourself.
Oh, no, just give me one example.
Be aware of what's really going on.
I am, Kyle. That I totally am offended by you saying something like that.
Well, too bad if you are, because that's the reality of what we're dealing with here.
This live broadcast last month was too much for Jackie O, who walks away from a multi-million-dollar contract.
I would never say things like that about you. That's an attack, and
It's not an
wouldn't do
attack,
that.
it's an actual fact.
Now, they probably spent more time together than the average married couple, and they fight like a married couple. The way that they were arguing effectively is two people who have spent far too much time in each other's circle, and they're just fed up with each other. Or at least Kyle is fed up with Jackie O, and Jackie O can't believe that Kyle is fed up with her. Now, the background to this is effectively nothingness. There's no reason for them to really have had this fight. I mean, they speak on live pop culture radio. They're never really speaking about anything important. The majority of their guests are simply celebrities who, if an asteroid hit tomorrow and just wiped out all celebrities, people would lose nothing. All their content would still exist, and we wouldn't need to hear their obtuse opinions about things that are curated by Hollywood or by the Australian film industry. And so for them to get into this much of a brawl over pretty much nothing, that's marriage. You fight over why the spoons are not in the correct place in the cutlery drawer. And so I feel bad for them as people because at the end of the day, I'm sure this is not going to be enjoyable for them. I hope that they get a modicum of privacy because hopefully if they do end up going into the obscurity of retirement, which they deserve, they've been in the public eye for far too long and far too deeply. I hope that this goes smoothly. I hope that they don't go at each other because despite the fact that I believe they've been a net negative for Australian society, they have added to Australian society. And so there are many people who have listened to them for many, many years. And as such, I do think that we owe it to them as human beings to give them the privacy that they need in order to get this done outside of the public eye. Let them just move on. There'll be new voices. There are more people that you can listen to. Radio, I mean, in my opinion, radio is pretty much dead at this point. It's going the same way as news media, and for good reason, because scripted content is boring. Scripted content that pretty much anyone can put together now using ChatGPT is boring. There is nothing intrinsically interesting about it. And in fact, it seems as though it is going the way of the dinosaur, because the only thing now that really gives interesting content is fake content. Content that is created, curated. It is not real. It is something that is dreamt up in the editor's playbook. And there is no better example of that than 7 News. Now, 7 News has been a fake media organization for a very long time. And I know that term was popularized by Donald Trump. And to an extent, it is almost like MAGA coded now that you do not trust the legacy media. But they just keep doing things that make us not trust them. When you come out with a headline that has nothing to do with the story, or when you come out with a headline that summarizes the story in a way that is not realistic, it becomes very difficult for us to sit here and pretend as though we're going to take you as a news source. So 7 News comes out with a headline saying that Donald Trump is conceding. He's conceding that the war is not going to plan. And you look at that title and you think to yourself, oh, America must be losing. Iran must be winning this conflict. But that's not what is happening at all. Even the video that they show doesn't even indicate that. It has nothing to do, in fact, with the conflict pretty much at all, except for Donald Trump's opinion on the fact that he's shocked that Iran is bombing all of their neighbors. Watch.
Under fire, Iran hits America's consulate in Dubai and targets another in Jordan. This war is not playing out the way the man who pulled the trigger thought it would.
Amazingly, they're hitting countries that were, let's call them neutral, right? They lived together for a long time. I think they were surprised. I was surprised.
America is still boasting of its successes, though, knocking out 1,700 Iranian targets. This is the view of an Israeli pilot as Iranian soldiers flee before impact. Israel claims to have hit the headquarters of the Assembly of Experts in the Iranian city of Qom, where a new supreme leader was to be chosen, Ali Khamenei's son, Mojtaba, said to be the leading contender. The US says all 17 ships of Iran's navy are gone.
They have no navy, it's been knocked out. They have no air force, it's been knocked out. They have no air detection, that's been knocked out. Their radar has been knocked out. And just about everything's been knocked out.
But Iran's showing it still has the power to fight.
And since we live in a society where people actually going in and reading past a headline is almost unheard of, 7 News can get away with this sort of thing, where they reach a conclusion that has nothing to do with the content, or at least might have a tangential form to the content. And this is the same playbook that we've seen across Western media, specifically on the left, where you take the summation of a group or a storyline and you say to yourself, okay, well, the conclusion of that is this, that Pauline Hanson, for example, never votes for housing affordability. There is an entire website that is dedicated to effectively conglomerating all of the information of the Australian Senate website and then creating new titles and saying, this person doesn't vote for this 80% of the time, or this person does vote for this most of the time. Like, saving oil companies would be the title, and they vote for it, Pauline Hanson, 100% of the time. And this is what the 7 News media, the 9 News media, pretty much every mainstream media, and the ABC for that matter, mainstream media organization has done now for the better part of 10 years. It's why you're starting to see a shift in the way that people are voting to the right in the youth. The youth are starting to vote for right-wing politicians, not because they're stupid, but because they're getting their information from places that aren't the mainstream media. The boomer class that for so long has been hated by the left wing of politics are now the only ones that are still voting left wing, or at least left leaning. That is the Liberal Party, at least in Australia. And so in my mind, it seems as though these things going the way of the dinosaur is a good thing. Kyle and Jackie O getting off the air is a good thing. 7 News finally starting to realize that they cannot win unless they fake their headlines is a good thing. Because for them, clickbait is the only way to actually get themselves across the line, to get their agenda across the line. These media organizations do not hold a modicum of truth within their titles. You have to dig in to what they are actually saying in the story, because a title conclusion does not indicate the actual information that is within the story. It's the same way that we're seeing content flying out now about the Iran conflict. And what is happening there, in essence, is the same thing that is happening here. It is fake media organizations taking a story, putting it out to the public, and just giving them a conclusion without any of the actual information. For example, saying that 160 school children are dead because of the conflict, and then stating that it is the fault of the USA and Israel, with no real information as to whether that bomb came from the US and Israel, or whether it was a misfire from Iran, which by almost all evidence at this point, that seems to be the case. There are videos circulating online of a missile which goes up and then comes down far too early, landing approximately 500 meters away from the military base that was right next to the school. And so when you hear a headline, you do have to dig a little deeper. And that doesn't just indicate from our media sources, it goes to our politicians as well. Because our politicians are creating scenarios in which they give a conclusion in the Senate specifically, because they have free speech rights that we don't have as a general populace here in Australia. And so they will say things that may not be true in any way, shape, or form. They are simply the headline. And so we got to see David Shoebridge effectively consistently lie from the Senate floor, just spout nonsense about the way that Australia should look at things or about the way that things are, but in fact they are complete lies. But it's not all negative, because 7 News is dying, 9 News is dying, the legacy media is dying. And with that comes a new wave of information and people getting their news sources from everywhere. Getting news from people like Sam Bamford, people like Carl Stefanovic, the podcast media, You can curate your own listening list. You don't have to listen to a news segment which only gives you their angle. You can pick 5, 6, 7 different people that you really enjoy listening to and just listen to them. You don't have to listen to people who will give you 99% of nothing stories and then just filter in a little bit of nonsense that makes you think, just from the headline, that story is in fact true. When in essence, it's got nothing to do with the title. And what that effectively translates to is a lack of transparency, where a headline for a story like we just saw should be something along the lines of, Donald Trump is confused as to why Iran is bombing its neighbors. That's the headline. That's what Donald Trump said. And when Katie Gallagher stands up on the Senate floor and says, we're removing this bill because we'd like to clean it up, what it should say is the Australian public got onto us about the fact that freedom of information means that it should be free. Watch.
Thank you, President. I move that the government business order of the day relating to the Freedom of Information Amendment Bill 2025 be discharged from the notice paper.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. The government is taking this step because we understand that it does not have the support of the Senate and it would not pass the Senate in its current form. But this is an important reform and the government does remain committed to it. Freedom of information—
Minister Gallagher, please resume your seat. Order across the chamber. Seriously, senators. Please continue.
Thank you. This is an important reform and the government remains committed to it. Freedom of information is a vital feature of our democracy, but the way the FOI system is working now is unworkable. The current framework is stuck in the 1980s, before smartphones, before artificial intelligence, and our laws genuinely need to be updated. Last year, public servants spent more than 1 million hours processing FOIs, and we continue to listen to the feedback that we are getting and across the parliament, but we do seek to negotiate in good faith to progress this important reform.
Now, after this, Senator Michaelia Cash stood up and effectively attacked Katie Gallagher, which I personally think is super hypocritical. Michaelia Cash stood up and not only backed, but attacked anyone who didn't back the hate speech bill that passed in January. Now, hate speech does not exist. At least it should not exist. As a hindrance on free speech, it should not exist. Because how do you define hate speech? You can't. Not really. It's subjective. What I think is hate speech is not what you think is hate speech. You might think it is great attack on a terrible organization. I would think that you're disparaging my faith. What I think is really good discussion about where and why we spend money in this country, you might think is a racist attack against people who are minorities. And so what you think is hate speech, I think is discussion. What I think is hate speech, you think is discussion. And that's why it should all be allowed. Because if you can't discuss the things that I think are bad and I can't discuss the things that you think are bad, then we're just going to end up talking about nothing. Because the whole point of politics, as we spoke about in the last episode, parlay, is that we have two opposing views, two opposing missions. We both think different things. And so if we can't come together and clash those ideas in a way that may seem hateful, then how are we going to get to peace? The only way you get to peace and not live within a cold war for your entire life is by having the conflict, is by saying, here's where we are going to go do battle on this topic. Here's the rules around which we are going to do that battle. Hopefully simply with words. And if we can get to the conclusion simply using words, then great. But if you try to silence speech, or in this case, try to block information, as we see with Katie Gallagher, then you are going to end up in a situation where the only way that you can actually resolve your conflict is physically. That's a civil war. A Cold War will become a civil war if you do not allow people to have the hard discussions. It is the most important part of a Western democracy, is the freedom of information and it is the freedom of speech. And it has to be free. It has to be. You have to be able to do it freely. For the Labor government, who has been the least transparent government in history by all reports, this is a step too far. They are taking the people, the Australian people, for schmucks. They are saying to us, because of AI, because we are in a new age, you can no longer have freedom to information. It has to be paid for, because otherwise, how do we know who is real and who is not? That's not that difficult to pass out. If you can have a university education system which uses products like Turnitin, which can trace and track what is real content and what is not real content, then you can do the same for the Australian Parliament. You can very, very easily put together a system which basically filters all of the FOI requests, freedom of information requests that come in, put it through a system like Turnitin, push out all the ones that are AI content, and only look at the ones that are written by real people. I'll let you know, though, a lot of people use AI just to format their information. And as such, you're going to knock out a whole bunch of people, which I think that that's a price that should be paid. Because at the end of the day, if you cannot write your own information with your own hand, then that is something that you can say, well, it's not really you asking, it's the AI. Or you can just ask it to only format it in a way that makes sense, and then it probably won't even be tripped by the Turnitin platform. But in saying all of this, there are people who are trying to actually create a transparent situation within our government. And Senator Alex Antic is one of the best examples of this. He is effectively taking up the charge on what is waste, fraud, and abuse within our government. And he is starting to make a lot of noise when it comes to what and where we spend our money, our taxpayer money, your dollars in this country. Watch.
Really? Well, I did a bit of deep diving into where some of our money is going, and I found a whole heap of fairly informative grants that might be of interest to the Australian people. And I wonder which of these the Prime Minister would pull in order to put some food on some Australians' table. Starting with this one, intercultural protocols for sustainable human activity in outer space for $500,000. Here's another one, addressing long-term climate displacement in Australia for $500,000. Not much food going on the table with that one. Change the date, Australia Day, reconciliation and the politics of division for a cool $1.48 million. That's a lot of dinners for Australians right there. The next one is Muldana Burra Yina Gabra stories of Yorta fruit picking for $1.4 million. Wow. Innovating a new framework for Indigenous-led climate adaptation strategies for $500,000. Not a lot of food going on the table there. What about reducing gender inequalities for women with psychosocial disability for $500,000, Prime Minister? And what about this one? Informal sexuality and civics education pedagogies of LGBTQ+ youth for $500,000. Not a lot of food going on the table for that one, Prime Minister.
And with that, we're going to take a quick look into Iran, because the conflict is still waging, but the US military is effectively saying that 86% of Iranian missile capacity is now done. There's a new Ayatollah, and it's the son of the old Ayatollah. Big shock, big surprise. These are effectively monarchies after all. The US has come out and said that they are going to keep killing leaders until they effectively give up. They come to the negotiating table again with a real solution to stop their nuclear program, stop their missile program, and stop their space program. I don't see really how anyone can be against what has happened so far. Yes, there's been some negatives. Yes, there have been some things that have gone wrong. It's not great that the US embassy has been bombed, that 160 plus school children are dead. that 6 US service members are dead at least and many more injured. It is not great that 3 planes were shot down by Kuwait. It's not great that Iran has dropped missiles on pretty much all of its neighbors. But at the end of the day, this conflict, for what it is, I do believe was necessary. And let me give you my opinion as to why. And we've spoken about this concept on the show before. The idea that when you do something because you have an inkling or a suspicion that potentially someone might have done something tomorrow, you can't really win in that situation. It would have been very, very easy for the United States to just sit pretty and wait until Iran had effectively built up its capacity, built up its capability to the extent that many more people would have died. It would have been great for the USA's media team, the government's media team, because it's very easy to say we're going to go to war when something has happened. It is not easy to say we're going to go to war when nothing really has happened yet. And so we don't know what the intelligence is. We don't know why the US decided that now was the time that they had to do this. You don't know. I don't know. Megyn Kelly doesn't know. Ben Shapiro probably doesn't even know. There is what they've told us, and there is what they actually know. Now, according to Steve Witkoff, who is the American envoy to that region, effectively he was the negotiator at the table with the Iranians. His summary is that they were buying time. They were saying yes, but doing nothing. But they were giving information that was terrifying the Americans, saying that they had enough uranium enriched at 60% to, within a week or 2 weeks, make the equivalent of about 11 nuclear warheads. Why would you say that at a negotiation with the largest military power on Earth if you did not want to threaten them? Not only that, he was also saying that they have thousands of kilos of 40%, 50% enriched uranium. Now, to run a civilian nuclear-grade energy system, you only need to enrich to about 5%. And so anything past that, you start asking questions about why do you need to enrich further than that? They had a space program. Now, if you don't understand why that's correlated, space means rockets. Rockets aren't just for space. Rockets are the same technology that is used in missiles. And so why does Iran need a space program when their population is currently going through one of the greatest failures when it comes to their economy ever? It only makes sense that they were using that as a shield for the fact that they were investing in new missile technology. And so the basic sentiment that I have is this. We don't know what we don't know. It is very easy to say that the US and Israel were wrong for starting this conflict. But there is a point of no return. If Iran had been able to enrich to a certain point, or at least build a bunker that could not be taken without a ground invasion, which would allow them to create nuclear weapons without any interference, if they'd been allowed to do that, if there was intelligence that indicated that that was happening, then the US and Israel had every right to do what they did. Because at some point it becomes impossible to stop them without losing hundreds, thousands of your own people. And we're not talking about a nation that delivers ponies to the rest of the world. We're talking about a nation that for the better part of 50 years has called for the death of America. Not the people, the leadership, the people who are in charge. We have people here who say death to Australia, but it's not the politicians. Well, it's rarely the politicians. I'm sure Lydia Thorpe has said it sometime in her life. I should fact check that. So until then, I'm sure she's said that at some point in her life. But all of this to say, what is happening over in Iran at this point, stop trying to make a moral argument. Stop trying to say whether you do or do not know what is happening over there, whether it is good, whether it is bad, because you don't know. Stop pretending that you've got some intel from Mossad, because you don't. No one does, except for President Trump, his leadership team, and Israel. And until we get the information coming out from them, all we've got is what has been said so far. And what has been said so far to me indicates that they had information that effectively led them to the conclusion that Iran was buying time in order to be able to wreak havoc on the region, and specifically on Israel, who is our ally and who you should be backing in this conflict. And that is still affecting Australia because our fuel, despite everything that Chris Bowen has said, is limited. We have now approximately 25 days left of fuel, 25 days left of diesel. Onshore, we have even less than that. In some places in Australia, fuel has skyrocketed to $4 a litre. I'm not kidding. That is being reported. Go look it up. But Jim Chalmers still came out and said that there's nothing to worry about. You don't have to be concerned at all. Don't be concerned that inflation is skyrocketing. Don't be concerned that we barely have any fuel. Don't be concerned about everything. We've planned for this. We definitely know what we're doing. Watch.
Regards to petrol, yesterday, obviously, Energy Minister Chris Bowen was saying there's no need to rush out, panic buy, because we do have the stock levels. People are still queuing up in front of servos. Some around the country have actually run out. Are you still confident in supply levels? And considering how fast the prices are going up at the Bowser, can you really blame people for running out to fill up?
I am confident that we've got the supply that we need, and that was the message that Chris was giving yesterday afternoon. There is no need to panic buy when it comes to petrol. And when it comes to the price of petrol, we're taking those steps with the ACCC to make sure that people aren't being taken advantage of.
And with that, we get to Farrer. The Farrer by-election has been called for the 9th of May. Now, this is going to be one of the most interesting by-elections ever. And by-elections always seem to be a little bit more interesting even than our national elections, because a by-election has the whole nation's eyes just on it. The whole nation is going to be watching this for two main reasons. One, it's Susan Laysold's seat, but two, because of the polling that One Nation has had, it could be the first seat that they take in the lower house. Now, why is that important? If One Nation takes this seat, they effectively get their first MP, which means they start getting funding from the AEC in a way that they never have before. Every seat that you hold, you get funding for each election. You can effectively take money from the taxpayer, utilize it for your campaign, and in utilizing it for your campaign, you then will pay it back after the fact. That's the way that the AEC funding works anyway. But this is an interesting election for several reasons. One is that the Liberals and the Nationals will be putting up their own candidates very soon in a seat that the Liberals have not lost for almost 50 years. The Nationals are going to probably see their votes split into nothingness. One Nation is, at this point, the front runner, at least by polling. But there's also Michelle Milthorpe. Now, Michelle Milthorpe is a very interesting candidate because she is from Farrer, specifically. Seems as though she's, a hometown girl, the kind of person who has lived there her whole life and loves the place. But in the same breath, she's funded by Climate 200. And we've seen what these Climate 200 independents are. The Climate 200 independents aren't independent at all. They're effectively an off-branch of the Greens. In fact, they vote with them approximately between 76 and 82% of the time. With the Greens, not with Labor, the Greens. So they have more in common with the most radical left element of our politics than they do with any sort of independent voice. And that's the problem again with our fake advertising or our fake titles and the fake way in which that we are told by our politicians that they're going to do X, Y, and Z. Because while they claim to be independent, all they mean is that they are independent from the major parties, but they aren't actually independent. They are funded by one person, or at least one organization that is run by realistically one person, Simon Holmes à Court. And if you don't know who that is, you should go Google him. He is effectively one of the most left-wing radical human beings that you will ever listen to. He is no better than David Shoebridge. He's definitely no better than Senator Payman. And he is everything that is wrong with our modern political situation, or at least the majority of it. Because while he can claim that he is an independent voice backing the green energy climate stuff and all of the pro-women stuff, effectively what he is a radical left-wing agenda holding maniac. Simon Holmes à Court has nothing except hatred for this country and what built it. It's why he claims on his website, the Climate 200 website, that 93% of the people who gave money gave under $500. But that is false and misleading advertising. Because while I, tomorrow, might go out and get 100 people, and out of those 100 people, 93 of them give me less than $500. Let's just say they each give me $1 each. The final 7 people gave me $1 million each. And so I now have $7 million and a spare $93 from the other people. But out of that 100 people, 93% of them gave me less than $500. And so despite the fact that it seems as though this is a groundswell organization, it most definitely is not. And with these organizations, the devil is in the detail. And that's not to say that the people that they have in there are all bad. Like I've said before, I really like David Pocock, but David Pocock is a Teal's senator. He's not an independent. He's a Teal's candidate. And the Teals are just an off-branch of the Greens. In fact, in many cases, they're even more radical than the Greens because they're not tethered to a party. At least in the party room at the Greens headquarters, they might say to themselves, that might not go down too well. With the Teals candidates, they can say whatever they want and do whatever they want, and Simon Holmes à Court would probably clap like this and just say, very well done, very radical. I don't actually know if he's British. But what I do know is that he's not independent. But One Nation is there. And on Saturday, they will be doing their own internal election, their own internal picking of a candidate. They haven't just selected a candidate, they are taking it to the people. They've given them 3 options, and all of those 3 options are just farmers from Albury, regular people. And that's who Pauline Hanson has said is going to be their candidates across the nation. It's not going to be just, the best person for the job in terms of politically. It's going to be the Australian who the local people want to see representing them. And that's how representative politics is meant to work. That is something also that Michelle Milthorpe believes. And so I did clip up her election campaign from 2025 where she did also run. And let's take a listen to that now.
My name is Michelle Milthorpe, and I have been committed to being present in your community because that's what real representation looks like. Today, The Australian published an article defending the fact that your sitting member has been missing in action and will continue to be as they garner support for their party anywhere but here in Farrer. Let me be clear, that's not good enough. While they've been making excuses, I've been here, on the ground, listening to you, standing with you. You've told me what really matters: access to childcare and healthcare, being able to find housing for yourselves and your employees, getting the visas and workers your businesses need, and real change to how the Murray-Darling Basin Plan is being implemented. Yes, the lights might be shining bright at the local sporting oval if the incumbent is re-elected, but that's not what you've told me is keeping you up at night, and it's not what's going to secure your future. Don't be fooled by someone who puts their party first and their community last. They think we're not watching. They think we'll stay quiet. What an insult. We deserve better. I'm Michelle Milthorpe and I'm here. I'm listening and I'm ready to fight for the future that this region deserves.
Authorised by Michelle Milthorpe, Albury.
And Michelle's right. But at the end of the day, One Nation, I do believe, is going to take a significant portion of this vote, if not win it outright. But it all depends on one really, really critical factor. Because it doesn't seem at this point like Labor will even run in the election. It doesn't seem like the Greens will run. So Michelle will effectively be on her own as a significant left-wing candidate versus 3 right-wing candidates. But where things could go haywire is if the Liberals decide to back Michelle Milthorpe. Because the preferences in this election are going to mean a lot. If the Liberal Party decides to vote for Michelle Milthorpe, or at least call for people to vote for Michelle Milthorpe, then things could go really haywire down there. Not only for the local election, but for the entire country. the federal level of politics, Angus Taylor has made overtures to the fact that he might be willing to work with One Nation. And as such, I do believe that we should assume, hopefully at this stage, that the Liberals will preference One Nation, as they should. They are far more ideologically aligned, or should be, considering they are all right-leaning parties, than Michelle Milthorpe and the Liberal Party. Michelle Milthorpe's platform is effectively, I'm going to give you money for childcare, more hospital stuff. Everything is going to come from the taxpayer fund. Whereas One Nation is all about water. It's all about resources. It's all about using the land for what it should be used for, which is to utilize it in the best way possible, get the government's greedy fingers out of it, and stop the rot that is our water buyback system. In saying that, I do believe that you should go on and have a look at all of these people. Go look at Simon Holmes à Court. I think he is a terrible person. And if I can give you one piece of advice to stick from this episode, it's this. If you see a headline that seems fishy, don't believe it, read it. Click on the link and actually read what that group has to say. If it's 7 News, if it's 9 News, if it's 10 News, if it is ABC, even more, because these people are lying to your face. When you see a post on Facebook, especially to any older listeners, when you see a post on Facebook that says that One Nation and Pauline Hanson vote against housing affordability, remember this. No bill has ever said the Housing Affordability Act. It doesn't happen. It doesn't exist. They are fake. They don't exist. Those sorts of things do not happen within the Senate. The bills are always long-winded, crazy, very difficult to read. These are 100-page documents. It doesn't just say housing affordability. And when you say they voted against housing affordability, that's not how it works. They're going to swoop in about 1,000 different little bits of legislation, which they have to do in order to make the Greens happy. Like every house has to be built with a rainbow flag on the front. And this is literally how these bills can go. And I know I should probably have wrapped it up by now, but this is literally how ridiculous it could be. The Labor government could say, we're going to cut $100,000 from every house right now, or we're going to give $100,000 to every first home buyer right now. But then the Greens will say, we're not going to let you do that unless you ensure that one illegal immigrant also has to be put in every one of those houses. And this website that exists, I've got to find the link and put it in the documents for you so you can see how crazy it is. This website will put that in and say, well, One Nation voted against housing affordability. But that's not what they voted against. They didn't vote against giving people $100,000, which they probably would, if I'm being honest, because it's a ridiculous idea which would make inflation go crazy. What they voted against was the fact that one illegal immigrant has to be added into that home. But they'll never say that inside of these websites. They'll just say, Pauline Hanson votes against housing affordability, or Pauline Hanson votes against public school funding, or She doesn't. She votes against the nonsense that is inside of the bills, the tack-ons, the additions, the craziness that is added in as though it is something that is going to help, or that the Greens, because they hold some sort of sway in the Senate, always put in because they can't let a good thing live without getting their agenda across. It would be like, we're going to build a new Sydney Opera House, but the Sydney Opera House has to have a, gay lesbian strip bar right in the front lobby. And they'll be like, oh, Pauline Hanson voted against this because she's unpatriotic and she doesn't want a new Sydney Opera House. It's very ridiculous. I think you ought to go and look into these bills. Everything you read that comes from the mainstream media, you have to go and dig into it. It is boring, it is tedious, but the more you do it, the more you realize how much the left lies. And they lie directly to your face, and they're indoctrinating an entire generation of people. The old generation are already indoctrinated. It's almost too late for them. You're never going to be able to tell them that, 9 News is not a reputable news source. They've been listening to it since they were born. This is not something that you can change. But what you can change is the views of the young. And the young are starting to move across to new media. And to us, to everyone, that should be a good thing. It can also be very bad because you can run into bad voices. But that'll do us for the show today. I will speak to you guys tomorrow. My name is Mark Pirotta, and this is the Mark Pirotta Show. God bless.